Liana, unmute yourself first. Unmute yourself, Liana.
Hit me again.
Again, you are unmuted.
You're muting me every time.
Ma'am, can you gear up with the volume? I have some difficulty. Lina, ma'am, can you gear up the volume? I have some difficulty in getting what you are speaking.
Okay, because I was on mute. So
can I please request everyone to not speak so that the presenters can start? Okay, please. Thank you.
So welcome everybody to this, the first series of Stay at Home and Continue to Learn webinars. As Vaishali was saying, this one is focusing on developing as teachers and talking about continued professional development for teachers. So a little bit of housekeeping before we, if I can move this. So as you will have seen, this whole meeting is being recorded and a link will be sent to the recording of the meeting tomorrow to your email. So you can share this with other colleagues that perhaps couldn't attend. To find more information about this series and the following follow-up webinars, you can go to the British Council Nepal website. You'll also receive in the email that you get tomorrow a link. You can type in your name and download your certificate for attendance. And you'll also receive a link to an evaluation and needs analysis form. And we would like to kindly request that all of you give us as much feedback as possible, as this will help us to design more webinars within this series and to make sure that they really suit your needs. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So if you are not the speaker, please keep yourself on mute. Can everyone mute themselves right now? I can see one person who's not on mute, apart from me. So please mute yourself because there are 250 people on this webinar. So if everyone's microphones are on, we will not be able to hear anything. So please keep yourself on mute as much as possible. It's also recommended that you switch off your video during the presentation. I'm doing the opposite. Myself and Amy will keep our videos on, but in order to not use lots and lots of bandwidth, it's probably better to keep your video off. You can use the chat box in case you have any questions for the presenters. So there will be time for questions. At the end of the webinar, we will do, I think, 10 to 15 minutes. We will spend specifically on your questions. So you can type your questions into the chat box and we will look at your questions at the end of the session. And you can use the raise hand button in case you have something important to share. So that might be that you can't hear anything or there's some kind of issue, then you can use the raise hand button. Okay, so on to this webinar. So the objectives of this webinar. Today, we want to, as we said, look at continuing professional development. And by the end of the webinar, you'll be able to understand the importance of continuous learning and lifelong learning. Be familiar with the British Council's CPD framework for teachers. Be able to understand the importance of self-reflection. You'll know about lots of different upcoming activities and virtual learning opportunities which exist. And you will have a list of useful links for your own self-development. So myself and Amy are going to present on all of these different topics for the next 45 minutes to an hour. We'll go between us. I'm going to now pass over to Amy to take you through the next part of the presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's so wonderful to see so many people joining for this webinar. At the moment, we have 266 people who have joined in, and we can still see people coming through the waiting room. So hello and namaste to everybody. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you all today with Liana, and my thanks to my British Council and NELTA colleagues for inviting us to talk to you today. Okay, so just to get started then, we're looking at this question of why continuous learning is important for teachers. And Liana and I, although we work on lots of different programs, we are also teachers. And this is something that we think about a lot, how we can continue to develop our skills and our knowledge. So my question for you to start with, and I'd like you to put your answers into the chat box, please. My question for you is, what do you think about this question that's on the screen? Why is continuous learning important for teachers? If you could just put your comments in the chat box, your answer to those questions, I'd like to have a look and see what your ideas are before I share some of our ideas with you. Okay, so I can see lots of people saying to get updated, to stay up to date. Yeah, lots of people saying to be updated. So something about technology, professional excellence, new skills, to be familiar with current issues. Yeah, gaining knowledge. Oh, I like that. Without professional development, we won't remain teachers. That was a nice comment there. To have a healthy professional career. That's nice too. I like that. To keep us abreast of current trends. Because it's universal, it's a continuous process. Okay, these are all fantastic ideas. Oh, and that's a really good one there, to inspire our students to learn. I love that. Okay, let's have a look at some of the ideas. Now, these ones came from a group of colleagues who are in India, who I asked just quickly on WhatsApp. I sent a message and asked them this question. So I wanted to see what they would say. And this is what they came back with. So Liana, if you can start putting those up. So we said, those colleagues said that it would help them to build professional confidence.
Hello?
They also said that it can be very motivating and it keeps work interesting. I totally agree with that. I think it keeps you from getting bored with what you're doing. You're constantly trying out new things and having new ideas for how to do things in the classroom. It's important to keep up with the latest research and to stay up to date with the current trends and things in teaching. There was also somebody who mentioned about technology and how it changes very quickly. There's lots of things that we need to learn and to continue learning as technology changes around us so that we can stay relevant with our teaching. There's also a nice one there around helping us to empathize with our learners. So if we are learning, we provide a really good model to our students that we are working with. That learning is a continual process that you continue right through school, beyond school, and even as you go into your profession. I really like that one. I think it's important. Okay, what have we got? To help shape education for the future? And I think this is a really good one too, because as we are trying new things, we are also learning, and we can share what we're learning with others. And we might discover things and approaches and ideas that some of our colleagues, either in Nepal or around the world, may not have thought of before. So we can help to develop our approach to teaching as well as others, and to shape the future of education. This is an important one too. I think as teachers, for our students, if we do the same thing every day, we teach exactly the same way. Every time we do a reading text, we do it the same way. We have 5 or 6 activities, we recycle them over and over. It could get very boring. So I like this idea of looking for new ways to teach and to progress our skills so that we have some variety in the classroom. We've covered this one already, I think, about learning being important for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher, if you're a policeman, if you are a government official, if you are a secretary, whatever you do, learning is important. We also have the opportunity from developing ourselves to help to develop our colleagues. Again, we're sharing our knowledge between each other. Knowledge doesn't just come from books and from experts. It comes from all of us, between and for each other. Okay, I think there might be one more on there, Liana. Yeah. Okay. So thinking about this in terms of reflection. So continuous learning is important because it helps us to develop both in terms of the areas that we need to get better at, but also in terms of the things that we are already good at, but we can turn into what we might call super strengths. So things that we really excel at, we are really very, very good at. And with those strengths, again, we can help our colleagues to get better in those areas as well. Okay, brilliant, thank you. Okay, I just wanted to move on then to share this definition of continuing professional development. So I've read a lot around this topic. We talk about it a lot in the British Council, and this is one of my favorite definitions, which some of you may have seen before. So I'm just going to read it out to you and pick out some of the key points that it makes. CPD is a planned, continuous, and lifelong process. So we talked about some of those ideas just now. Teachers try to develop their personal and professional qualities. And again, I think that's a very useful way to look at it. It's not just about skills and knowledge for teaching in the classroom, but also our own personal qualities that we can continue to improve on and to develop. We're looking at knowledge, skills, and practice. And through this, it leads to our empowerment as teachers. And it helps us to gain that confidence, to be able to take responsibility for what we do in the classroom and to really support our learners, as well as the school or the organization or the institution that we work for. So I think that's a really nice definition that kind of covers all of these different areas. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, we can see some of the research evidence and what it says about the best types of CPD for teachers. So this is a question that a lot of people ask. There's lots of things that we can do. There are lots of approaches to continuing to develop our skills and our knowledge. But there is also lots of evidence which says which things make the most difference to teachers. So all of you will have been to lots of different training sessions, you will have read many things, you will have seen lots of videos teaching you new skills, and you know that some of those things are more effective than others. When we look at the research, this study that was done by Walter and Briggs, which is a study which looked across several different research studies that had been done in this area, to see what the common themes were from these different types of continuing professional development activity and which ones were the most effective. They discovered through that research that these 7 things here were really important. First of all, it should be concrete, it should be specific and classroom based, so focused on what happens in the classroom. Secondly, it should involve teachers collaborating with other professionals. So in the same way that we're doing here, teachers working together, having a chance to share some ideas and talk to each other in the chat like we've been doing, trying to collaborate. It also suggests that the best professional development activities connect teachers with expertise beyond their own institution. So recognizing that within one school, there can be a lot of expertise and knowledge, but by bringing in outside ideas, that can help to make it even stronger. Another very important point here is about how teachers are given the choice about what they do or don't do. So teachers should be able to select the professional development activities that they do. It also highlighted the importance of mentoring and coaching, and said that this was another very important aspect to continuing professional development. Just give me 1 second, I'm having trouble with my screen. Sorry. Next, the research showed that this should be sustained over time. So not just a one-off activity, but something that should happen over a period of time. And finally, it said that the research shows that in order to be successful, it needs to have the support of school leadership. So that means that the head teacher in your school needs to be not only providing opportunities, but following up, checking that teachers know how to think about their strengths and areas they want to develop, providing ideas and support for how they might continue their own development. Of these 7 items that we've seen here, the session that we're doing today is really focusing on the 2 that are given in bold. So we're trying to involve you in selecting your own professional development activity by giving you a lot of options and ideas for things that you might do. And we're also trying to emphasize the fact that professional development needs to be sustained over time. It's not about one webinar, one training activity, reading one book. It's about really trying over time to do a series of different activities and things. Okay, moving on. Some of you may have seen this before. Can you tell me in the chat, if we move on to the next slide, have you seen the British Council's framework of continuing professional development for teachers before? Can you just tell me in the chat, have you seen it before? Yes, yes, lots of yeses. Yes. Lots of you have seen it, not yet, okay. A few no's, mostly yeses so far. Keep going, let's have a look. Yeah. Oh, yes, it's very comprehensive, good. No, 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 yes, okay. A bit of a mixture. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but I think it's a very useful way of thinking about the different aspects of teaching that we can develop. So what we did at the British Council is we pulled together lots of different ideas and research and frameworks that were existing and trying to identify these 12 what we call professional practices which make up teaching. Some teachers will do some of these, not all of them, but most teachers will at some point in their career be working across these 12 professional practices. So we've got planning lessons and courses, managing resources, so that means the things that you use to teach with, so teaching and learning aids. We've got using inclusive practices, so supporting learners who have different needs. We have things like promoting 21st century skills, such as creativity, critical thinking and problem solving, digital literacy, those kinds of things. The last one there, I think, is a good one, which is about understanding educational policies and practices. What does the government say that education should look like? What is their policy on, for example, language in education? So being aware of these things as a teacher is important. So you can see there that we've got these 12 areas that we believe are important for pretty much all teachers. Just to highlight one last one before I hand over to Liana, knowing the subject. This is where we talk about the subject content knowledge that you need as a teacher. So for all of us on this call, that would be your understanding and knowledge of English. For other subject teachers, it might be some, it could be biology or maths or geography or whatever their subject is. So that's where we put the knowing that particular subject content. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Liana, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the CPD framework.
So yes, so what we're going to do next is within these different professional practices, thinking about kind of what are the areas that you might want to work on and what are the areas that you have strength or lots of knowledge in. So the framework itself has been broken down, so each of the professional practices that's there you can think about in terms of these 4 different stages. So, sorry, can you put yourselves on mute, please? Somebody's very loud. So, if you think about the 4 different stages, if we look at, for example, one of the professional practices like integrating ICT, and think about what these 4 different stages are. We've got awareness. So you've heard of the professional practice. So for integrating, you might have heard of the concept of using different ICT within your classroom. And that's pretty much your level. You've heard about it, you understand what it is, but that's it. Then moving on to understanding. So then you've you know what the professional practice means and you know why it's important. So for integrating ICT, you might know about the fact that people are integrating ICT into their lessons, using computers, using mobile, whatever, within their classes. And you understand something about why people are doing it, how it's helping them to teach. And then the third one is engagement. So in terms of engagement, then you demonstrate competency in the professional. So for example, for ICT, you are able to use ICT within your classes. So you're using computers effectively with your students, or you're giving them work in their own homes using computers or different ICT. And then integration, you demonstrate a high level of competence in the professional practice, and it consistently informs what you do at work. So you're consistently able to integrate ICT into your lessons. And often people who are at this kind of integration level will also be teaching other people. So we'll be supporting colleagues and helping colleagues to learn and to integrate ICT into their classes as well. So that's just an example for one of the different competencies. But you could also look at this for all of the different competencies and kind of reflect on your own ability in each of these different areas and sort of create a little profile of yourself. So here's a profile that one teacher has done, and they have looked at each of those professional competencies and thought about where are they in terms of those 4 stages. So they then have a nice idea of what areas they need to focus on in the future. So you can see this is fairly typical for teachers. You don't tend to get everybody is great at everything. That we have a mix of different skills and knowledge of different areas. And if you do this across a school and look at teachers with their skills and knowledge, it can be very interesting to see how teachers might be able to support each other. So if we're moving on to think more generally about self-reflection, so that's one way that we can reflect on our teaching practice. But it's important, really important for teachers to reflect. Teaching is quite a particular profession. It's a little bit different from other professions maybe, because we're often in a classroom situation where lots of things happening. And we have to, at some point, kind of take some time out and think about what's working and not working, but perhaps after the class is finished. So it's a form of reflection. So as you can see, what John Dewey was saying was that we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So just highlighting why it's really important to think about what we've been doing as professionals, and hopefully that will help us. So what you can see here is a kind of self-reflection cycle. So little questions that you might ask yourself about what you're doing. So what are you doing in your class, for example? Why are you doing it? How effective is it? How are your students responding to it? And how can you do it better? And then you can see the cycle begins again. So it's kind of like lifelong learning. It's something that you continue to do. You never finish reflecting. I'm done now. So it will always continue within your life and always remain as a cycle. Here we have some ideas for how you can reflect on your teaching practice. So here we're going to try and do a little poll. Let's see if it will work. I'm going to launch the poll. And you can have a look, and I'll just talk you through some of these ideas as you're doing. So you can see which of these things you've done, and you can vote for more than one thing. Is that working? Is it coming up? Can you see a poll?
Do I need to start that for you, Liana?
No, it's fine, it's fine, it's working. I can see people are doing it. So these are all different ways in which teachers can reflect. So we have the teacher diary or voice message reflections. So teacher diary is your traditional way of writing down each day. You might write down after your lessons are finished and think about what went well, what didn't go so well, what I'd like to work on in the future. Just giving yourself that time to kind of think it through. But obviously with technology, we've got our little smartphones. It's really easy now to just record voice messages to reflect. So instead of having to write it down, we might just take a moment in the corner and record a few of our reflections using a voice recording. Excuse me. And then we have peer observation. So this is a really nice way to reflect and to engage in conversation with your colleagues in a kind of non-threatening way. They can come in and observe your classes, and you can discuss things that are happening in your classes and discuss different ideas and reflect on what might be working or not working so well in your classes. Recording your lessons. So again, these little guys are giving us lots of opportunities to be able to record things really easily. So we can make videos of our lessons. It doesn't even need to be video, it can also be audio if we want to really focus on things like instructions. Again, really easy to do with current technology. And then the last one is student feedback. So asking your students what they felt about the lesson in a non-threatening kind of way to get really honest feedback from your students about what they feel they're learning, what kind of activities are working for them, and giving them a little bit of control as well in terms of what's happening in their lessons. So let's have a look at the poll. So I've asked you, have you ever done any of these following types of reflection? So the biggest one, the most common, is for asking students for feedback. Can you see the results of the poll? Yes, you can all see. Okay, so as you can see, peer observation, so that's great, excellent. So many people doing peer observation. 59% of you are doing peer observation. And then recording lessons as well, not so popular, but written notes after your lesson. Again, that can be really, really simple, really fast, little ideas and notes, but really, really useful. Really the important thing being the process of actually thinking about what's happened in the lesson. And then writing a teacher diary. Okay, brilliant. Looks like you're all reflecting lots on your teaching already. So what can we do? Let's see if we can move on to the next. Oh, there we go. What to do next? So what we can do then as a result of all of this reflection is to start looking at kind of patterns and areas and places where we want to really develop our skills and think about plans around what we might want to do and what we might want to focus on. So I think this is a really useful thing to have a look at when you're thinking about how you want to focus on development. So this is something which looks at it's kind of the results of a study at how people learn in professional settings. So it's not specific to teachers, and you can see a lot from the wording here. It's not specifically about teaching, it's about professionals or working generally, and how we develop within our working environment. So you can see that 70% of the learning that we do at work is generally experience-based. So 70% of what we're learning, here you've got working on a challenging project, but that might be in our situations, going in and teaching something new or different, or teaching a different year that we haven't taught before, taking on additional work responsibilities, secondment. So we have a great opportunity often in our classes to be trying out lots of different new things in the classroom. And that kind of experience-based learning is exactly what we're talking about here. And that's 70% of what you learn when you're, and the way that you'll develop and learn new things is through that type of learning. Then we have 20%, which is peer coaching, feedback-based, network with external companies. and mentoring. So I think, you know, teaching is quite an interesting profession in that we have a formal feedback part to it that is based on people coming in and watching us work, which is unusual for professions. But it also means that we get this fantastic opportunity to receive feedback on a regular basis from our peers, but also from our other people that are working, our colleagues working in schools. So that can be a really, really good way for us to learn and to develop as teachers. And then 10% is the formal education. So that's taking a course. It's going to 5 days of training, and that's where we're learning 10% of new knowledge. So most people tend to think it's kind of the other way around. Yeah, if I want to learn, then I've got to go and take a course. But it's just to sort of switch that over a little bit and help you to think about the importance of that kind of experience-based learning that we're doing all the time. So just to keep you thinking on that way about different ways in which we can develop in terms of CPD activities that we might want to do, and to get you thinking about what are the different types of things. So this is 3 different levels, which are kind of low resource to high resource in terms of what they need. So you'll see that attending conferences and face-to-face training and workshops, that tends to be on that kind of right-hand side, on the high resource side. And the low resource side often is that kind of experience-based training that we're all taking part in anyway. So you can see lots of examples there: buddying, joining communities, listening to podcasts, reading blogs, etc. And then moving up to that kind of medium resource, more informal and non-formal courses, trying to write articles, carrying out research, so action research in our classrooms, for example. And then higher resource, looking at these kind of more face-to-face training and work shadowing, coaching, etc. So I'm going to pass over to Amy to kind of talk you through what this might look like in action.
Thanks, Liana. I'll just pick up 2 questions that were just related to the last slide about what buddying and work shadowing were. So Liana, do you want to just explain what buddying is?
So buddying in a teaching situation, you might have somebody who's working as this on the same, teaching the same year as you, or teaching the same class as you, that you might want to decide to work together on a little project with, or decide to plan lessons together. Sometimes buddying happens when we have new teachers coming into a school, and they might get buddied with somebody who's more experienced. So it's like buddy means friend, and so it's like a friend, a support system for new teachers, for example. And the other one was, Amy?
Work shadowing.
Work shadowing. Yeah. In a teaching scenario, I suppose it could be, so you're going to look at somebody doing a different job. So for example, if you were interested in school leadership, you might go and shadow a head teacher for a few days and go and understand something about what their job means, what they do on a daily basis, and get a better understanding of whether that's the type of job you would want to do in the future.
It could also be if somebody is a head of department, or if somebody does something, some extracurricular activity, and you've never done an extracurricular activity and you want to find out how they manage the students when, you know, they're doing a club or something. It could be any of those things. So just finding somebody who does something you're interested in and haven't done before, and then going and following them around like a shadow. Okay, we're going to have a look then, as Liana said, we're going to look at a little case study, because we think that sometimes when you're presented with all of these different options of things you can do, and all these ideas, it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes, trying to work out how to move forward or how to decide on something to do. So this is a little case study. So this is Suchita. She's a teacher in a secondary school in a medium-sized town in Nepal. She's an English subject teacher. And she did her B.Ed 7 years ago, and she attends training workshops every year. So the mandated training workshops that are run by her provincial government, she attends those workshops. Okay, that's what she does. But she's really interested and motivated and wants to get better at her teaching. She's been teaching for 7 years. She tries some things out sometimes, but she's looking to do something new. Okay, let's move on to number 2. Okay, so the first thing that Suchita did was she thought about what her strengths were. And I think, you know, again, coming back to this idea I said earlier on in the session about super strengths, I think sometimes as teachers and just as people generally, we spend a lot of time thinking about the things that we're not very good at. And actually, it's really important to think about the things that you are good at as well, because you can help other people to develop those skills. You could be a mentor for somebody who wants to get better. So in Suchita's case, she's really good. She identified that she's really good at lesson planning, and that she was able to take a template that had been given to her in a training session, and she uses that template all the time. She thinks about what she wants her learners to achieve during the lesson. She plans her activities really carefully to help them do this. And then she, very importantly, checks what they have learned by doing a formative assessment, and she plans the next activities and the review activities she might do accordingly. So I think, you know, she's really confident that she knows how to plan a good lesson and she knows the elements that go into that. So that's great. Okay, so then she started to think, okay, but what am I not so good at? What are the things that I need to improve a little bit more? Okay, so moving on to the next box, number 3. She recognized that one of the things she finds difficult is managing the lesson. Okay, she teaches in a secondary school, she teaches teenagers, she has quite a large class, and sometimes they can be a bit noisy, a bit boisterous, and she feels sometimes that her classes are total chaos. Which she can find a little bit stressful. So she's got a lovely lesson plan, she knows what she wants to do, but sometimes it all just falls apart. And I think all teachers can relate to this. I think we've all been in this situation at some point in our career. So what does she do? Let's have a look at number 4. Liana? Sorry, thank you. So this is what Suchita decided to do to try to figure out how to solve this issue that she had. So she asked one of her colleagues to come and watch her lesson. So we talked earlier about peer observation. Many of you said that you had done peer observation before. So this is a nice example. And she very importantly gave her peer observer a specific question that she wanted her observer to look at during her classes. So this was looking at, okay, why are my lessons so chaotic? What is the main problem? Can you see what is going on that is causing the issue? And what her colleague helped her to do was to realize that she had an issue with giving instructions. So she would start to explain an activity, the students would get distracted, they weren't listening to what she was saying, and then she would ask them to do a task and they wouldn't have any idea what they were supposed to do. Then it was a big mess, can you explain, la la la, and there's, you know, a big mess. So once she had figured out what this particular thing she wanted to work on. So this is really important, again, about reflecting on specific and concrete things that we want to improve on. So identifying what is the particular issue that I want to improve on. So next, she then decided that she was going to have a look online about ideas for instructions, and she wanted specifically to look at how she could make her instructions better. And she found a series of resources online. She looked at some documents, she watched a webinar, and then she made some notes and she tried them out in the classroom. So she tried out these ideas that she had to see which ones were successful and which ones were not so successful. And another thing that she could, well, actually, I'm going to ask you. So what else do you think she could have done once she was trying things out? Was there something else that maybe she could have done after she did that that would make sense? If you have an idea, can you write it in the chat? What else could she have done at that point? Okay, so someone said action research. This is a little bit like action research. She identified a problem and she's looking for the answers to try and solve it. That is the simplest form of action research. She could have raised her voice. Okay, yeah, she could have tried that. Okay, some more questions about, some more suggestions around action research, yeah. She could have tried to make them more engaged. That's true. So maybe it wasn't the instructions. Maybe her activities were just a bit boring, possibly. She could have involved the students more. Okay, so yes, thank you, Rajan. So you said suggestions from colleagues. She could also have asked other colleagues for some ideas. That's a good idea. And she could also have asked her colleague who came to observe her to come back and see whether she noticed any difference with the way that her instructions were being given, and to give her some feedback again. So it creates that little loop, the little cycle of activity to try to improve her practice. Okay, so we just wanted to share that as one very, very small example of somebody who has identified something and looked at what they could do. Now, obviously, for us now, with the current crisis, the schools are closed, we're not with our students in the classroom, but it doesn't mean that you can't take yourself through that process of self-reflection that Liana talked about. Now is a really good time to think about, okay, if I think back and reflect on my classes, what are the particular things that I might want to improve on? Where do I have things that I just don't feel comfortable with, as well as the things that I feel really confident about that maybe I could write something about, or I could share something with my colleagues. Okay, passing back to Liana.
Let's see if we can move slides. It's not working for me. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second.
Oh, it's nice to see everyone on my screen. Hi.
Here we go. Is it going to work? No. Okay, fine then. I'll just have to...
You change the slide and then share it to the new slide. Yeah.
That's what I'm doing. It's such a shame it worked so well until now.
Amy, there's a question there about the last slide. Would you want to take that?
Okay, sure. So the question about remote areas when there's an absence of the internet, how would she improve her teaching? Okay, it's a really good question. I did actually think about that when I was writing the slide, but then I realized that we were doing this session on Zoom, so all of you are online. So I thought that would mean that most of you who are joining this can get online to look at these things. But of course, there are many teachers who can't do that. So for those teachers, I think really making use of peers, of colleagues that they work with, and also just maybe brainstorming. I mean, some of these things we can think of ourselves. If we sit down and have a think about, okay, what could I do to improve that? What is the actual problem? How can I work through it step by step? Some of these things, I think if we take a bit of time, we can come up with the solutions to them, and we can try things out, and if they don't work, then we try something else. But I think in areas where the internet is not available to teachers, using each other's expertise and the people around you is really the best way to go.
Okay, so here we have, so when we're thinking about people who do have internet access, decided on specific areas that they would like to focus on. There's lots and lots and lots of resources out there, and in fact it can be quite bewildering how many resources are there, how many different things there are that you could get involved in. So what I've done is put together just a few resources from the British Council that might be useful and good starting places for finding more opportunities to learn and to develop in specific areas. So obviously we have the Stay at Home, Continue to Learn webinar series in Nepal in partnership with NELTA. So if you go to that particular website, you can see the full list of all of the different webinars, and they're obviously a great way to continue to learn. Then we have a Teaching English Facebook page. So if you need an opportunity to kind of consult with other teachers, but also want to feel like you are part of a community, this is a huge community of teachers. It's 4 million teachers from across the world who are part of that community. And it's constantly updated with different very relevant materials, either for learners or and then the Teaching English website that goes with it. So there you can find, if you think back to the CPD framework and all the professional competencies that are there in the teaching competencies, you can find resources which relate specifically to those. So there's lots and lots of really useful stuff there. And then there's a specific page on there which is for this current COVID-19 scenario, helping teachers with getting online, but also helping teachers who are in kind of more remote areas to access information and ways of reaching their students. So lots and lots of resources there. Obviously Twitter to get lots of updates on what's happening. And then we've got MOOCs, which are massive open online courses. I don't know if anyone's ever done one of those, but they're free online courses. They're usually 3 to 4 weeks in length. A great way to meet teachers from other places, but also a great way to learn. And there's lots and lots of topics. So there's I think there's 4 different British Council ones that are coming up, but there's a huge wealth and thousands of different MOOCs that you could be taking part in for whatever kind of area you'd like to develop. And then if you want to focus on that kind of developing your subject knowledge part, you might want to work on your English language levels. There's lots and lots of resources out there to help you to improve your English language levels on the Learn English site. And now there is also a level check there. So you can go in and do a little test, understand something about your level, and then find resources specific to whatever area you'd like to work on there. So even if you don't want to or don't feel that you need to improve your English language levels, certainly great for students as well. Okay, Amy, I may have to stop sharing and come back, but just, you know, talk amongst yourselves.
So I'm just going to talk you through some specific resources that we have available. And just before I start with that list, I just thought, actually, I was thinking about the question about teachers in remote areas or teachers who don't have access to the internet for one reason or another. I know that the British Council Nepal team is looking at sending out SMS and looking at how they can do that as an option for teachers. So that might be something to keep an eye on if it's something that maybe you could participate in. Maybe we'll hear more from the British Council in Nepal about that. Can you put it on slideshow? Yeah. Okay, so in terms of specific resources then, so Liana has mentioned some of our websites, Teaching English and Learn English, for example. They have various webinars and things, events that are happening, but they also have some specific resources. So if you look at the top one there, that is a page on the Teaching English website, which has a list of resources, content, ideas, specifically for teachers working remotely with their learners, for example, during the COVID-19 crisis. So I highly recommend having a look at that. And if you just look a little further down the slide, one of the things that you'll find there is a series called Remote Teaching Tips. And this is a series of, it's currently 14 documents, 2-page documents, so short and snappy, which are aimed at teachers to help them with all sorts of different types of remote teaching. So whether you have teachers who are able to get online with their learners, or if they have absolutely no access to the internet, but they could contact them via SMS or via the phone, perhaps through social media if they have some internet access, or WhatsApp. There are some really useful practical ideas and guidance in that series. As I said, there are 14 at the moment, but there will be up to 30 over the next coming weeks. It's brand new. It's on the basis of this current crisis that we're dealing with. So if you are interested to look at a whole range of technologies, I would have a look there. There's also the Teaching English website, and one thing to highlight there, as you can see at the top, is there are some study guides for each of the 12 professional practices that we mentioned, and these are self-access. So something that you might like to do is to think about those 12 professional practices, choose one, maybe two, that you would really like to improve in and spend some time focusing on, and download the guides that we have there for each of those professional practices. There's lots of advice as well as activities that you can do to work through those. Really recommend that. Okay, and as you can see there with our teachers at the bottom, just to highlight again, as we've been saying throughout the session, that your colleagues are fantastic sources of information and ideas. And I just saw somebody in the chat as well saying about groups of teachers. It's not just about having one person that you talk to, but maybe getting together as a group and starting a little support group for each other's professional development if you don't have access to one of those already. So that might be something to think about doing with, I know NELTA is a fantastic association with lots of support, but maybe in a little small group with your colleagues to share ideas and things you want to focus on. Okay, we are almost exactly on time. So we are going to leave it there. And I believe we now have 15 minutes for questions.
Yes, thank you, Diana. Thank you, Amy. We will now open the floor for questions. Please could you all type your questions in the chat box and we'll try and take them one at a time. So please could you use the chat box for your questions, please?
I did see one question that came up earlier that I made a note of, which is about recording audio. So when Liana put the poll up, there were 20% of people said they had done reflection by recording audio, and someone had asked what some different ways we could suggest that they could use recording, sorry, not recording audio, recording their lessons. Liana, do you want to say something about how teachers can record their lessons for their own reflection?
So yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways in which you can do it. So you could ask a colleague to record for you. So to sit at the back of the class and to record the lesson. You could be recording yourself, but I wouldn't recommend during the lesson to be recording yourself, but voice recording, like just audio recording of a lesson can be really, really useful. Because particularly if you just want to really focus on how much you're talking and also how you're giving instructions and how you're using your voice and your tone and all these kind of aspects that you can really focus on. And sometimes that kind of taking away from the visual can help you to really focus on that part. And then, yeah, having a look at the video afterwards, looking at how you are interacting with the students. And then, yeah, in the same way that you would do with, let's say, a peer observation or a formal observation, that you have certain areas that you're trying to focus on when you're watching the recording or listening to the recording. And then you can use that as a way, as sort of building block to understand what areas you want to focus on. That's it. I'm trying to see if there are any questions. Okay, Amy, some of the teachers are not interested in professional development activities. What do we do with them?
That's a good question. So, okay, so what is it about? It's about motivation. So I think one of the key things is to find out what the barriers are. So for some teachers, getting involved in professional development activities, the idea of it means they need time, they might need money, they think, they might need access to the internet. These might all be preconceptions that teachers have about it. So I think sometimes it's important to find out what the specific reluctance is that teachers have. Sometimes teachers, feel that they do an okay job and they don't need to develop. But I think it's sometimes about talking to them about, maybe making small adjustments, or perhaps using the skills that they have to teach other people first, and using them as a mentor for other people and getting them into it that way. So could you teach so-and-so how to do this particular thing? And then maybe once they've got a bit of confidence from doing that, they might start to be more receptive to doing some professional development themselves.
There's one question here that's quite kind of specific. I've lost the question now. No. Okay, let me see. So what was it? Do you have any idea how to incorporate the lessons and templates and worksheets in tune with the Nepali curriculum? Ali, you could respond on some of the work that we've been doing around.
Yeah, I was just taking that question down. I mean, I think that even earlier when you mentioned, Amy, about the Teaching English website, we did have a couple of comments saying that on the Teaching English website is very difficult to contextualize it, to the Nepali context and adapt it. So maybe something that I'd like to tell everyone on this chat is we had an app, the Teach app, which was very Nepali context specific, which has lesson plans related to the Nepali context. We are currently reviewing that mobile app, and in about end of May, we should be able to relaunch it. So we'll let all of you know, of course. That app will kind of have very Nepal specific lesson plans and examples and samples which you can use. And probably one thing that we'll also keep note is maybe in one of the webinars for June or July, maybe we can actually look at ways of adapting lesson plans that already exist and kind of make it and contextualize based on our curriculum. So we've taken down that, I've taken down that as one of the expectations for our future webinars. Maybe we can think of that as a topic.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think, I think contextualizing resources, I think it's the responsibility of the people who make the resources, but also the people who use the resources, because no resource that you get from outside your own context, wherever you are, is going to be perfect. So I think it's about looking at it and seeing, what is it that's not right here? What can I change? And then sometimes it might be that it's not actually about the content that's being taught, but the way it's being taught, and some ideas for, the approach or the activity you might use with completely different content. So it might be a reading text, which is about something that is totally inappropriate for your students, but the way they approach the reading text is something you could do with a text which is appropriate. So I think it's about being clever, about seeing what is okay, what is not okay, and then not being scared to adapt and change things to make them suitable for you.
Emiliana, I think there's a question here. What is the best way of self-reflection? Do you think there's one specific way? Do you think there's a best way to do self-reflection?
I think it's very personal to different people. And I think it's something that, I think it's something that we do all the time anyway. So, it's very rare that you'd find a teacher who would walk out of a classroom and never think about the lesson that they've just taught again. Just erase it from their memory. So I think we're always reflecting. We always would walk out feeling like that went well or that didn't go well. And it's just a little bit more about formalizing that and then finding a way to do that in a way that works for you. So like I was saying there, there's lots of different ways that you can do self-reflection. And if you really like sitting down and you're a diary writer kind of person, then that's a great way to do that kind of reflection. But some people are not like that. And so it's about finding the thing that really works for you, and you feel really comfortable being able to use. And that you're kind of, you know, able to express freely what you felt about what you've just done, and that's going to be different for everyone, I think.
There's another question related to reflection. Is there any particular type of questions you can ask your students so that you can get honest feedback from them?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting question and a really tough one. But yeah, getting honest feedback can be, I think what's worked well for me in teaching is just asking very simple little questions about the class, not saying, you know, please tell me everything that went well or didn't go well in that lesson, but more like, you know, an overall, how did you feel about the lesson? Did it work for you? What's one thing that worked well for you? One thing that you learned in that lesson that you think you'll use in the future? Some things that are, I think it's really important that whatever questions you're asking are non-confrontational. So you don't want to put students in kind of an awkward like situation where you're asking them to say something. So it's like being really thoughtful about the type of questions you ask as well. Amy, do you want to say something? It looks like you do.
That was my thinking face.
Oh.
I would just add, I totally agree with what you said. I think the only thing I would add is that sometimes it's about how it's building on what you said, it's about how you frame the question. So I think sometimes saying things like, you know, if you're worried that your students are not going to want to criticize, for example, or the opposite, they might be too critical, you could ask them to tell you what they liked about the lesson and what would make it even better. So you can frame the question in that way that would make it seem less negative, but still give them an opportunity to tell you about things they would like to do differently.
Okay, I think we've kind of come to the end of our time. It's a little over an hour already. Maybe there were a lot of comments there about low resource classrooms. So something that I'd suggest is we will, at the end, like Ileana mentioned earlier, in your email tomorrow, all of you will be receiving a link to your certificate and also a link to an evaluation form, which is also a needs analysis form. So please take 5 minutes of your time to fill that evaluation form. And also there is a question where we want you all to tell us what topics would you all want in the next upcoming webinars. So please make sure you mention all of those. There were a lot of comments about action research and low resource classrooms. So please make sure you mention it there so that we can collate all of that and come up with a webinar based on your needs. Okay, so thank you so much, Amy and Liana. It was a wonderful session, a great start for the webinar series. We will be sending out the copy of the recording of the webinar as well, where you can access all this information. And separately, we'll send you a document with all the hyperlinks that our presenters shared today. Okay, so thank you so much. I think we'll end there then. Thank you so much, NELTA, the executive committee. I'm sure you all are still on the call. And for our next webinar, we have a next webinar on Friday. So make sure you all do click on the schedule and register for the next webinar as well. Please follow our British Council website for further information on that. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.